Welcome back to episode 69 of In the Shadow of the Evening Trees. I'm Jen Von Ebers.
I'm Dave Von Ebers. You may remember us.
Yeah, it's been a few weeks.
It's been a couple of weeks.
A couple of busy weeks.
So you may not remember us
Right.
in that case. They have been busy weeks.
Yes. But we are back with another episode, and we're happy to have you here with us.
Yeah, I mean, we don't really know you, but I'm just kidding.
But we have had a few busy the last few weeks, so we just needed to take time and do it. So this is what we're doing.
What did we accomplish though in that time?
So much stuff.
So much stuff.
A new vacuum cleaner.
We bought a new vacuum cleaner. That's going to be our new thing.
Highlight.
When we were in Target, we passed the book section. And I said, we got to start reading all the books no one's ever heard of by authors no one's ever heard of that they have in the Target, and then do reviews of them. And that's going to be our new format.
Yes.
It's the
book club.
the Target Book Club.
Yes.
And we could expand it and go to all the other similar kinds of places.
Do you remember what I said in Target when we moved up here?
What was that?
So when we moved from our hometown to where we live now, there was a Target by us, obviously laid out differently than our regular Target. And I went up to manager and said, we just moved here, and right. I've never been in Target before. And then David said, well, this Target.
Yeah.
I've been in Target many
before.
times.
Yes.
Yeah, Target seems to follow me wherever I go. If wherever I'm at, there has to be a Target within a minute. Literally.
It's the Starbucks of convenient type stores.
It is.
It's not really a convenience store, but you know what I mean.
I worked
They're
above
everywhere.
a Target, so that was crazy town, because then you could just go down there anytime you wanted to. My current job, literally 30-second drive, and then another
true.
Target.
That's right.
Here, a 1-minute drive, 2-minute drive to Target. So it's just something that's gonna be with me.
Although we don't go to the one in our neighborhood now very often.
We don't.
We do. They have a CVS in there, so because we're old people,
Picking up our prescriptions.
We have to go pick up our prescriptions all the time.
And then they harass you if you haven't come. Don't come
early.
Yeah,
we get a whole bunch of
Are you still
texts.
coming? What about now?
Yeah.
What
about now?
Next, an hour later. What about now? Are you coming? So we did have a Target run today.
I've got my water that I always have.
And I've got my vodka on the rocks.
Yeah. But what we should have done, I just had to take a drink and it reminded me of what we should have done and we didn't do, is we should have gone and bought out a case of Miller Lights.
Yes.
And just drank Miller Lights through the whole show in honor of the late, great Bob Uecker,
yes,
who sadly passed away this week.
He was a big Miller Lite fan. So are we.
And he was in all those commercials. Those were some of the first beer commercials with celebrity athlete types.
Mm-hmm.
But the best thing about Bob Uecker was that, his whole kind of shtick was, he played in the major leagues. He was a catcher for the Brewers, but his whole shtick was that he wasn't really the best Major League Baseball player. So he eventually had a tremendous career as a broadcaster. But it was this whole self-deprecating thing about it, how he was not a great baseball player,
right.
Which made him very endearing to people.
Yeah, he was the best.
Although we were talking about this earlier today, is a mediocre Major League Baseball player is infinitely more physically gifted than
your average person,
than anybody else.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean it's kind of funny to say, oh yeah, he was kind of so as
because you wouldn't even have gotten there.
Yeah, as a major league catcher.
Yes.
So
anyway. Rest in peace, Bob Uecker.
Yeah, and I will have to go get some Miller Lights in your honor. We live about equidistant from downtown Chicago and downtown Milwaukee. I'm a lifelong, well, you too,
yes,
lifelong Cubs fans. And nowadays, the Cubs and the Brewers, there's a big rivalry. But you put that aside for certain people, and Bob Uecker is one of them.
For sure.
So, anyway.
And we'll see at some point we may have to let our cat in.
She's outside crying. That's Gordy. Gordy, the vocal one.
I was just noticing that my sweater kind of matches the background a little bit,
yes,
which is nice.
Who gave you that sweater?
Oh my gosh, my dear husband did.
Yeah, because it was on the list that you sent me for Christmas. But
that's a fact.
That's okay. I think you gave me this lovely
I think I did.
fleecy thing, which this is going to be my new look now because I wore a fleece on the last one. The problem is we post both the audio version and the video version of this podcast. So if you were just listening on our website,
You have no idea what we're talking about.
yeah, or on Apple Podcasts or whatever, you would have
I look
no
amazing.
idea. I've grown about 6 inches.
Yes.
I've dropped about 50 pounds, and
We're
my
basically killing it.
biceps are massive.
So just put that picture in your head.
Should I let the cat in?
Yeah, you should let the
All
cat
right,
in.
I'm gonna have to let the cat in. Carry
Be
on.
right back.
Carry on. Yeah, we don't edit these things.
Yeah,
This
I'll
is
carry
just how
the
we
show
go.
until that.
Yes.
She was just in
Look at
here.
our lovely chairs. They're not office chairs. They're these nice kind of like
Dining room chairs.
Dining room chairs. Yeah. Well,
In our professional podcast studio.
it
in
is
our
what
guest,
it is.
in our guest bedroom. Come on in,
Welcome.
buddy.
Come in, Gordy.
And then she like stands there. Okay,
Yeah.
come on in.
And then she'll cry in the room.
Come on. She's
Hi.
like such a needy cat. But sometimes it's like if you shut the door without her in there, then she has to be part of the action. She's a very I wouldn't say nosy cat, but she's
nosy.
She does not
She's-
get scared with guests coming, plumbers coming,
Yeah.
any kind of tradesmen,
Anyone- right.
the pool people. She's right in there
Gotta
and
check it out.
just whatever they're doing, she's not scared at all. Whereas our other cat will hide for the rest of the day.
Poor Waffle.
I know.
Waffle's sort of my coworker because she hangs out with me. We talk about this all the time, but there's never not the right time to talk about your cats.
I know. We were just saying how people who are not cat people, I don't think they've just had the right cats. Because we've had many sets of cats in
Yes.
our 30 years together, and all of them have been amazing.
Yeah.
So we've never had a bad one. We've watched briefly that crazy show Jackson Galaxy on
Yes,
where he
yes.
was going into people's homes where their cats were like out of control, chewing things. I mean, just totally crazy. And I was like, we've never had that.
We've
so
never
we,
had it
we
at
never
all.
have the need to have Jackson Galaxy come to our home with his guitar case filled with cat toys.
But we have guitar cases in our house,
We
so
do
we
have
could
guitar-
put cat toys in them.
We could.
That would be a thing.
Plus, he had people like really like put elaborate things in their home for their cats, like along the ceiling. It would be like these cat walls, and
yeah.
you know, you're really like not damaging your house, but I mean, it's just kind of like extreme to like keep your cat entertained.
What if we need to see that sometime on House Hunters, where someone's selling a house and they have these
and they
these
walk
complicated
in and go,
levels.
What the hell is this?
Yeah.
I do feel sorry for the people who on House Hunters who they go into our home and they're like, "This is horrible," you
Yeah.
know, and they're like, "I'm gonna gut this," and I'm like, you know, that is somebody's actual house,
Right.
and they're gonna be watching it proud
Right.
that their
Oh,
house
yeah,
was
for
shown
sure.
on there. My
Absolutely.
house is gonna be on House Hunters, and then the people walk in and just trash it.
Yeah, well, there's some, you know, I mean, and that's the thing I think has always been the case with reality TV, and we've talked about the fact that we are guilty of sometimes watching it.
Yes.
Reality television shows, but you know that a lot of the stuff is not necessarily completely fake, but you know the producers of the shows kind of egg people on. I
For sure.
think there was on MTV, or maybe it was VH1. I can't remember which one, but they had
Forgot about VH1.
they had a show that was like a behind the scenes at the Jerry Springer show.
Yes,
I
they
think it was
did.
Jerry Springer, right?
Mhm.
And they showed how the producers on that show would really get people all hopped up and angry when they weren't maybe necessarily that mad at the other
No,
person.
and actually saying things that were untrue, and that's
Yeah.
how the people came out with like fists and like yelling and screaming right off the bat because they were told something that wasn't necessarily
Yeah.
true.
And one of the things that drives me, it's the same thing in sports announcing as it is in House Hunters, is that the most annoying thing I'm a lawyer, but I'm an editor, right? So most of my day I'm, you know, either writing stuff that someone else is going to edit, or I'm editing someone else's stuff that they've written. And so I have little pet peeves about language, you know. And the thing that drives me nuts is repetitive language, right?
Yes.
Like I always joke about how in like 1987, the baseball announcers discovered the word carom. You know, like the ball hits the wall in the outfield and it caroms off the wall. And they would say that word like 50 times in a broadcast, right? It was so annoying. But House Hunters is like that. Everyone walks into a house and they go, "This is spacious. Honest to God, no real human being says the word spacious ever in their entire lives.
Until they're on House
Right.
Hunters, and then you're asked to say that.
Or they'll say, it's a little tight.
Yeah, it's a little tight.
It's either spacious or it's tight. This is a family-friendly show, so I won't use the expression that I would, but it begins with a go and ends with yourself.
Well, we can make this explicit and start swearing on here if you want to.
Let the expletives fly.
Let the expletives fly.
But there's a lot more going on in the world than just
Yes.
our complaints about reality television and sports.
TikTok is leaving.
TikTok is leaving.
At the time that we're recording this, it could be the last day.
Yeah, it is Saturday night, the 18th of January, in the year of our Lord, 2025.
Yes.
I don't really understand the whole thing. I mean, I do understand that there are like data privacy concerns and all that. What I don't understand is how the federal government can shut down a social media site. Although I'm not really sure they're 100% shutting it down. I think what they're doing is they'll impose penalties for companies that allow you to like download the app on your phone and stuff like that. That's another thing, is I think the law itself is a little bit unclear. But I just don't understand the concept of the government saying, from a First Amendment point of view, like, well, we're going to shut down this social media site. And in any event, I mean, even if there's a rationale for that, I mean, obviously the Supreme Court thinks that they can do it. It just seems weird to me. I've only been a lawyer for 37 years. Well, what do I know?
Right. And I didn't realize this until this week, that 170 million Americans, are on TikTok.
Yeah.
That is huge. And then also like the revenue that is made from it, from people who started businesses on there, who have quit their jobs to, do TikTok full time. And it's, for those people, it is a full-time job, because it is not something you can do for an hour and be like, I hope I get some money from it. Right. You actually have to work it. People are. And, I've seen in the last few days just people just saying like, not that they can't find people on other platforms, but it's not the same, kind of thing. So we'll see what happens. I think it actually is going to be shut down. But what I was asking David, and I haven't looked up myself, is I've only posted a few things on there. I mostly am a viewer. But I don't know if for people who have big followings, if they shut it down and then it comes back, like, is all your stuff still there?
That's a good question. My guess is probably, but I don't know.
And that's the other thing too, is like a lot of people save videos they're recording in the TikTok app. Right. So using the TikTok app to edit and everything, so all of their data is there. So for the longest time, I don't keep on for a lot of time, but I do have a blog. But I do want to put more stuff on there, because if TikTok goes away, if Instagram goes away, if Pinterest goes away, you at least own something that's yours that will never go away.
Well, nothing on social media sites belongs to you, though. Once you post stuff on Instagram and all that, it already belongs to Meta or whoever.
Exactly.
But the thing that is crazy to me, and I'm sure there are legitimate data privacy issues, because, for example, on my cell phone, I have some work applications on there. It's my personal cell phone, but I use it to check email and that sort of thing. I have Teams on there, so that if I for some reason can't access from my computer, I can join a meeting through my phone, right? So I mean, those things are handy and convenient, but I cannot have TikTok on my phone because it violates our company policies, and they're concerned about the data privacy. But here's the thing, there are data privacy laws in the world. The European Union is a big one, and I think in the UK they have some pretty robust data privacy laws. So we could just pass a meaningful data privacy law in the United States instead of banning social media platforms.
Well, and what's the difference from other companies who your data is breached, kind of thing. So you can't really guarantee that even the ones that say, keep your stuff private, and all of a sudden you get something from your medical carrier that says, oh, whoops, sorry, some of your stuff could be leaked.
I think the problem is that the company that operates it is located in China or began in China and has close ties to the Chinese government. And I think for my company, because we have a news division, that's part of the concern is that, because as a news organization, you just can't put any data at risk that a government could have access to, right? So especially one where we have journalists there covering things that are going on there, it could compromise and potentially endanger our journalists. So I understand why, and they just have, in this instance, it's just a company-wide policy. I'm not a journalist, obviously, I'm a legal editor, but I think it's just a sensible company-wide policy for us. But from a purely private, personal point of view, like if I wanted to, I could either not have company stuff on my phone, or I could have a separate cell phone. I know people who have more than one cell phone because they use one for business and one for personal reasons or whatever. But if people want to use it for personal reasons, it seems like the way to handle the potential problem is through legislation that would protect everybody's privacy across the board, not just on TikTok, but on every platform, whatever. And, companies that like Meta and all these other companies, they have to make changes to satisfy European standards all the time because they're not going to give up on that part of their market,
Right.
So they comply with those laws overseas. They don't comply with them here because they don't have to. But that's what you need. But we have a dysfunctional Congress. That's one of the biggest problems. Whoever is in the White House, aside from who's in the White House, the biggest problem, not the biggest, but one of the biggest problems we have is Congress can't get stuff done. If you don't have a supermajority in the Senate, you're not going to be able to get things passed. And even if you did, there'll be 2 or 3 members of your own party that are in someone else's back pocket, and they'll say, and they won't support it. So it's just, I don't think we talk enough about how broken Congress is.
That is for sure. And obviously, it's the last weekend of the Biden administration.
It's the last weekend of freedom.
Yeah.
It all ends on Monday.
Which I kind of think, you think about like, how did we get to this point, kind of thing, and what's going to happen. Yeah. And unfortunately, people are going to find out really quickly that all the promises he made that he said he could do, he can't do any of those
The grocery
things.
prices aren't going down.
No.
None of the prices at Target or wherever are going down.
Right. He doesn't know what grocery prices cost anyway,
right.
But
well, and think of how things have changed. George H.W. Bush was not only Reagan's vice president, and Reagan was extremely popular, and then the Bush 41, as they call him, won by a huge landslide when he was elected in 1988. He then, the U.S. got involved in a war, and he ended it successfully in like 90 days or some unheard of thing. You would think that you couldn't possibly lose re-election under those circumstances, but he did, and one of the reasons he lost was because there was that famous thing where he was in a grocery store and he didn't know how a grocery store scanner worked.
Yes.
And he sat there like a dork, completely mystified by the grocery store scanner. And people were like, he has no clue how the rest of us live.
Right.
And the economy obviously was kind of shaky, and it was very easy for Bill Clinton to take advantage of that. Well, fast forward to either 2016 or 2024, there's nothing that Trump could do. No matter how ridiculous he acts, he's 1,000 times more embarrassing than Bush 41 ever was. But there's nothing he can do. He's so clearly out of touch with reality, let alone the rest of our lives. But to his voters, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It just doesn't matter.
I was listening to NPR. I've been listening to NPR lately on my way home from
Her
work.
brain is getting bigger and bigger.
I'm like so smart right now.
I'm going to have to find another podcasting partner because she's so much smarter than me now.
It is fascinating because they do talk about things that you just, it's almost like being able to listen to a newspaper because they are talking about all the things that are going on. But one of the people had said, which I thought was funny, and it could happen, is like, Trump is inheriting a good economy. And if he does do nothing, it might be okay because he's not going to, I was almost going to say,
yeah.
He's not going to mess that.
I think I've said bullshit on this podcast before. I just did.
Second time.
Yeah.
That, it may not be as bad because if he doesn't do anything, at least he's going in with things like, unemployment. But yeah.
It's not, no, but he's not going to, that's the thing is he's not going to do nothing. And that's, ironically, he the last time he did very little. He did next to nothing, and then COVID came along, and hundreds of thousands of people died, and he just couldn't get his act together to do anything about that. And literally, all he had to do was like performative stuff, like show up with a mask on once in a while, or encourage people to do the things that follow the safety protocols, and his cult-like followers would have done anything he said.
1,000%.
But now, the problem is it's not just Trump, it's all the people around him. I mean, they're already talking about starting immigration raids in Chicago on Tuesday. And, I mean, even if it all fails, even if that plan fails, and let's face it, it's very, very unlikely that they're going to be able to deport millions and millions of people. It doesn't matter because they're going to use that power to just be cruel to people and to disrupt people's lives and
families, all that.
Yeah. So they are going to do that kind of stuff. And he will do the tariff thing most likely. And so, what's going to happen? Democrats supported tariffs generations ago because there were still American manufacturing jobs to protect. It might have made sense when Democrats wanted to do it decades ago. But now so much of those manufacturing jobs have gone overseas. Tariffs are just going to make all of our, our home goods and everything like that more expensive because somebody has to pay them, and it's not the government of China. I don't know why Trump thinks it's the government of China. So it's going to make the price of goods at the store go up. Plus, the companies that still make stuff here in the United States, they buy the parts from overseas. Do you think GM, every single part in your GM car is made here in the United States?
I know, and that's the thing that
those tariffs are going to affect the tech companies because so many of the component parts of your computer and your phone or whatever, even if they're assembling, Apple always says that, assembled in the United States. Yeah, but from parts made in sweatshops in China.
Right.
And that's why all of these weirdo tech guys are bowing down to Trump because they think they're going to get, certain exemptions. So maybe it won't affect the price of an iPhone, but it's still going to affect the price of the car you buy, even if the car is manufactured or assembled in the United States.
Well, and everything, clothing, furniture, housing, everything, is going to go up.
And even, I think it's nearly impossible to deport all the millions of people he claims to want to deport. But you can disrupt the agricultural industry enough and other industries enough that, there will be problems with the food supply. Prices will go up at the grocery store and so forth. So all of, he's 40 or 50 years too late with the tariffs. He's just going to screw people over. And those small to mid-sized companies that still manufacture stuff in the United States, let alone like GM and the big companies, their cost of production is going to go through the roof. He's going to cause businesses to go under, the small one. GM's going to survive, but the small companies that rely on, imported parts from places like China or Mexico, they're going to suffer.
And the risk of immigration, in Chicago, it costs time and money already when nothing has even happened because the mayor of Chicago said, I have to take this threat seriously. What is going to happen? Right. So it's not like they can just wait and then just all of a sudden, but
exactly.
It's just crazy time.
Under I think both Illinois law and Chicago ordinances, local authorities are not supposed to cooperate with immigration officials when they conduct raids and so forth. But not cooperating is sort of open to interpretation. I got to be honest with you. I do not have much faith in the Chicago police to run interference for immigrants who are here. And one of the more ironic things about this, of course, is that they're going to be swooping down on a city like Chicago, who had a huge influx of migrants because Greg Abbott in Texas and Ron DeSantis in Florida conspired to essentially traffic those people, lie to them to get them on buses and trains, and drop them off in Chicago.
Literally drop them off.
Literally, with nothing, with
Right.
not two nickels to rub together, as the saying goes. So the city of Chicago said, "Well, we're not going to let these people starve. We're not going to
Right.
let them just be on the streets. We're going to. It's a crisis that Republicans created. We're going to take care of these people to the extent we can." And now Trump is going to come in and act like he's, Chuck Norris or some nonsense, and he's going to round up all these people.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean that the federal government, the Biden administration, is blameless in all of this, because they knew that this was happening, and they didn't really have a coordinated approach to dealing with. If I'm into, I'm very open-minded when it comes to immigration. I really have no problem with people coming here, regardless of their circumstances or where they're coming from. But you still need to have a coordinated strategy. If thousands of people show up in a short period of time, you have to figure out how to make sure they're okay. And the Biden administration really, and this has gone on for ages. It's not just Joe Biden, and it's not any particular president, but it's gone on for ages. But the federal government just kind of said to Texas and places like that, you figure it out to some degree. I mean, obviously there's federal immigration people on the ground in those places. But when someone just shows up, it isn't necessarily fair that Texas should bear the entire burden of taking care of those folks, or any other border state. So you can point the finger at Democrats and Democratic presidents and say, okay, well, what were you doing to help those people? Fair, totally
Right.
fair. But the reality is, the reason why there's a lot of immigrant families in Chicago right now, there's a very large number, is because Republican governors sort of, I won't say rounded them up, that's not fair, but basically, deceived them, got them to get on buses, and they showed up in Chicago and other cities like that. And that's, so now, it was unfair to say to Texas, this is your problem, but it's also unfair to say to Chicago, it's your problem.
Here they are, right.
We're a country. We should take care of people, regardless of their immigration status. You can't let children go hungry and that sort of thing.
And the other thing that will not happen.
I will never be able to get elected president of the United States, because I'm like, well, what if we just got rid of all the immigration laws? Problem solved.
Right, exactly. That'll work.
And
the other thing that will not happen in the next 4 years is any more student debt relief.
Yeah.
Because we know that that will not be on any high ticket priority. So for the millions of people, I believe it's 5 million people who've had either all or most of their student loan debt, is life-changing for those people. And I know that they would have continued if Kamala was in the president. They would have continued trying to do that kind of thing. So for people who didn't get the benefit of that, it's going to be another long wait for that.
Yeah, it's really strange. I mean, and of course, we're living, every time you turn around, there's some insane thing happening in the United States, or some big thing, if not an insane thing. I mean, Jimmy Carter just passed away, and of course that brought up all kinds of memories from that time period. There's the inauguration on Monday, which also happens to be Martin Luther King Jr. Day, which, I mean, it's a coincidence that that's going to happen from time to time, because there's one federal law that says the MLK holiday falls on the third Monday of January, and the Constitution says that the inauguration takes place on January 20th. So those things are going to align from time to time. But it's beyond belief, to think that this is happening on the Martin Luther King holiday.
Yeah, that part's sad.
That part is really sad. Well, it's all sad, but that's the thing. Thinking a little bit about Jimmy Carter, that it's that was my first election in 1980 when he ran for re-election, and you know, so many things went wrong from that moment on. You think about, I mean, just the 70s were a very imperfect decade, or we were a very imperfect country in the 70s. But it was a time period, I think, when a lot of people, the civil rights movement really reached, its most successful sort of peak in the 60s with the passage of the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. But nothing happens immediately. You pass legislation and it doesn't just automatically transform the country. People were sort of doing the work in the 70s. You think about television, think about pop culture. We were actually there. I think some white people were capable of having self-critical thoughts and saying, well, am I part of the problem? There was actual progress on like every considerable, and on everything. The environmental movement really took off in the 70s. The women's rights movement took off in the 70s. I mean, those things had existed for a long time, but
they're gaining
what
momentum.
was happening in the 70s was actual progress, imperfect progress. The gay rights movement, of course, imperfect progress, but it was progress. And then, Ronald Reagan came along, and really the only thing that Ronald Reagan stood for was stopping all that progress on every conceivable front. Labor rights, women's rights, gay rights, African-American civil rights, the only thing that Reagan wasn't ultimately opposed to, which is sort of ironic given where we are today, was immigration reform.
Yeah.
He supported immigration reform. I mean, they tightened up some of the laws. Now, when you apply for a job, you have to provide proof of citizenship. That was a thing that began under the Reagan administration. But also as part of it, they gave people who were here a path to citizenship so that they could just get on with their lives and didn't have to fear
be
being
here,
deported. Right. So the only positive thing, the only sort of progressive thing that came out of the Reagan administration was immigration reform, which is hilarious to think about now because the Republicans have just gone off the deep end on immigration. But in every other aspect, it was like, we're done. We're not moving forward. And if we can move back, we're going to move back. I mean, he talked about wanting to bring prayer in school back. He talked about wanting to ban flag burning. He talked about wanting to overturn Roe versus Wade. Took many, many decades to accomplish some of those things, but Reagan's entire rationale for existing was to stop progress. And no matter what you might have thought about Jimmy Carter in 1980, he would have kept that momentum. The other thing about Carter, I don't want to get into Israel and Gaza and all that because that's way above my pay grade. I don't know enough about that. But Carter was sort of like the last American president who could both be, have unwavering support for Israel, but also act as an honest broker between Israel and its adversaries. He, got probably the last really successful peace agreement between Israel and Egypt. Israel and Egypt have certainly not gone to war since, and that seems to be missing, our ability to sit down with all of those parties and work things out like we could in Carter's time. Doesn't seem like we can do it. So if you look at all these things that are happening today, this insane anti-immigration stuff, rolling back civil rights, attacking marginalized people, I mean, so much of this goes back to what happened in 1980.
And, we've talked about this before, during the whole campaign, how much hate towards the transgender community was insane. And our oldest daughter is transgender and their partner is, and we have other family members. And for the transgender community is like 1% of the population.
Oh,
Why is it so great of a thing to attack these people when it's just such a small group and there's so much bigger fish to fry, and all the laws and all the things that are trying to be put in place for people getting medical care, for parents to make decisions about for their kids or medical care is just shocking to me. And the other thing I don't like about like harsh transition, and I'm calling this a harsh transition from Biden to Trump, is that it seems like once another 4 years goes by, then it's like you have to unravel all the stuff that has happened, and that takes time. So it's like you get all this progress and everything, and you get so far ahead, and you think that you're making things right and better for everybody, and then it just goes backwards, and then you have to bring it forwards and backwards, and it's just like a constant. I mean, it's been like that forever, but.
Right, and I mean, I think it has been, and progress is never like this perfectly linear thing where you're always going in the same direction, and you're always, every day you're a step, further along than you were the day before. But this feels different to me. I'm old. I've lived through a lot. We talked about Trump's inauguration taking place on Martin Luther King Day, the first real public historical event that I can remember in my life. I mean, I vaguely remember, the election in '68, but I remember the King assassination. I remember being 5 years old, almost 6, being in kindergarten. I remember, my parents talking about it. I remember, everything that was going on around us, and just the shock in my family, because we actually, supported Dr. King in my family. Not every white person did in our neighborhood. I can tell you that right now. Sure. But just the sort of the devastation of that event, and then the unrest that came from it. The riots just a few miles from our house on the west side of Chicago. The National Guard going in to bring food to people who were stranded in there. My father and other people in the community went to a Catholic church right on the border between our town and the city of Chicago, and they, packed meals for the National Guard troops to take into people who were stranded. Just thinking about that event, but as horrific as that was, it did inspire a lot of people to kind of again, to re-examine where things were and re-examine themselves and say, am I part of this problem? Is there something I can do to actually help get beyond this problem? I feel like today, we're going so far backwards, and no one wants to be part of the solution. No one wants to do that self-critical examination. You've got this, this comic book villain nonsense that's coming from people like Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk, where they're the biggest wimps on the planet. I mean, let's just be honest. I don't like to play into gender stereotypes, but they're the biggest wimps on the planet, but they're pretending to be these macho dudes. Why? Because they think Trump is some kind of macho dude.
Like he won't accept them if they are any different.
And it just feels very different. Like the number of young people who supported Trump. Now, granted, our age group was the worst in terms of support for Trump, at least white folks in our age group. Mm-hmm. We were the worst. So it's hard to point fingers. But there were a shocking number of younger white people who supported Trump. And I don't get it.
We talked about this briefly today, but I kind of think that the problem with the reason for that is because they're following in their parents' footsteps. Yeah. So if you do have somebody who believes that, or is a conspiracy theorist or whatever, you've grown up with that, and it's like almost like you can't make your own decision, or you feel like, okay, if I vote differently than my family, not that they would even know, but I mean, that it would just be like you feel like you've abandoned your what your family has done. I worked with somebody briefly who was a Republican, and somebody in our group had asked her, like, why are you voting this way? and she couldn't like give any policy, any reason or
Yeah.
anything, and it was just because that's what her parents did, and we had to like end the conversation because you can't have obviously
Yeah.
a conversation like that with your coworkers because it's always going to just be
Right.
like not very comfortable.
Right.
But it was also just like another eye-opening thing. It was just like there's so many people who don't actually look at the any of the issues that are
Yeah.
going on, and they just blindly follow in their family's footsteps. So it's just like that has to change, kind of thing.
Well, that's another thing too about thinking back to 1980 again, is that everyone is saying, well, this was a vibes election, like people were making decisions based on their feelings and not, and I'm like, yeah, sure, that's true, but 1980 was every bit as bad in that same respect, is that people didn't vote for Reagan so much because they thought he would make good decisions in the White House. They voted for him based on this weird flag-waving, sappy image that he
Right, as
portrayed.
an actor.
As an actor. There was, when he was running for re-election, on Saturday Night Live, they did a parody. This is my recollection, and it's been a long time, so I may not have this exactly right. But they did one of those parody commercials.
Right.
There. And it showed all of these very melodramatic scenes of Reagan. They showed him on a horse with a cowboy hat on the ranch, and they showed him all dressed up like at an official state dinner and, hanging out with royalty and all this stuff. And there was like real dramatic music and everything like that. And the voiceover at the end of the bit said something like, Reagan for king, Mondale for president. Like, because that was, it was pure sentimentality. Reagan didn't stand for anything other than stopping progress, but he didn't stand for anything affirmatively. He stood for, looking at the American flag waving in the sunset and a tear dripping down your eye. And I'm 18 years old and I'm like, who's falling for this? Honest to God, who's falling for this? It's so cheesy, it's so hacky, it's so fake. How are people making decisions on this basis? But they were.
Yeah.
And I think that's, that mentality, it's probably worse today with social media and all that, but that mentality is what got us Reagan, and it's certainly what got us Trump. There's just not any real thinking going on, I think.
No, not at all. So we don't know what the future holds. For next week, I hope that we know a lot more of how the first week is going to go with his presidency. We'll see if TikTok was actually banned.
Yeah.
He'll.
I don't know enough about this area of the law, so don't take my word for it. But watch for Trump to try to do something melodramatic to look like a hero.
Right.
So he'll probably try to figure out how to, reinstate it or
flip a switch.
flip a switch. Yeah. It's a series of tubes.
Right. It is.
He'll try to do something to make himself look good, and okay, maybe that's good, because I still think it's very bizarre to shut down a social media site. One other thing, and we don't have time. We're running long, and we'll have to talk about this next time. But so Biden is certified that the Equal Rights Amendment is now part of the Constitution. And there's all kinds of discussion about that law nerd stuff going on, because there's a question about, is his certification valid? But it is a fascinating subject. And at least a couple of law professors, including Larry Tribe, who's, pretty legendary as a law professor, say, no, it's part of the Constitution now. Because it was passed by 38 states, which is the requirement. Virginia was the last state to pass it. And I want to say that happened a few years ago, maybe during Trump's first presidency. I don't know. But the argument is that that there's. We'll talk about this in more detail. But Congress put a time limit on ratifying the Equal Rights Amendment, and the time limit has expired. It expired a long time ago. But the argument is Congress didn't have the authority to put a time limit on it. So the time limit itself is not effective. And so
doesn't count.
By Biden signing off and doing whatever he has to do to send it to the National Archives or whatever the heck it is,
right,
that it is now part of the Constitution. It's the 28th Amendment. So that's a fascinating thing. But it's not a crazy, there are law professors, constitutional law experts who say, nope, he was okay. It was okay that he did it after the expiration of the deadline.
Interesting.
So we'll have to. I'm not prepared to go into that whole conversation
Yes.
because I don't know enough about it. But it would be an interesting last move for Joe Biden. Of course, it'd be fair to ask why he didn't do it on day one instead of the last day.
For
but
sure.
That's a different issue.
Exactly.
Anyway,
But if you made it this long, we appreciate it.
Yeah.
And thank you for following us.
that's a teaser for the next time because next time we can talk about the ERA.
We can. And you can listen to us wherever you listen to your favorite podcast.
Easy for you
And
to
then
say.
if you enjoy this format of seeing us on video too, let us know in the comments too, because we will keep on doing it if that's what you guys prefer. You've got
All right.
choices, so many choices.
So many choices.
But thanks for listening.
not on
Thanks
TikTok.
for watching. Yes, and we'll talk to you next time. Bye.